This is Comic Picks by the Glick.
Hey, I'm your host, Jason Glick.
Hey, Jason Glick. Hey, this is the Christmas episode, isn't it?
Yes, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Uh-oh, or
Ho,
Happy
ho, ho,
Holidays.
ho.
Happy Holidays, everyone.
Yeah,
I'll keep it like neutral, but it's still for those of you that celebrate Christmas. Merry Christmas.
yes, Merry Christmas, everyone. And it's like we've got a great one for you tonight because, like, what says Christmas more than anything else than like talking about Warren Ellis rebooting the entire Wildstorm universe? Like, I'm saying it, so it's true now. But well, because like when I think about Wildstorm, it's like I think Jim Lee, I think J. Scott Campbell, I think Brandon Choi, and also I think Myron. Hey, Myron, how you doing?
Speaking
I'm
of,
doing good. I'm doing good today, gentlemen. How you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing great, man. So I'm glad you could join this for us because, as you know, longtime listeners and readers have probably guessed, your experience of the Wildstorm universe is probably a lot different than mine, really.
Yeah. So of course, our favorite artists, Jim Lee, and a few others. When they departed Marvel, they started Image Comics, and from Image, we got a whole lot of great independent series such as Todd McFarlane's Spawn. But Jim Lee ended up creating another subset called, Wildstorm. And from Wildstorm, we had Wildcats, Gen 13. We had just so many great books come from that era. And me being a follower of Jim Lee from the X-Men days, like I was really compelled to see what new work he was going to be putting out. And at that time, like I really got drawn to Gen 13, which was one of my favorite series from that era. And that's what really put me on to J. Scott Campbell as an artist. And quite frankly, for me, he's probably one of my favorite artists of all time, and I still follow his work and buy a lot of his variant comic books. But Gen 13 to me was just kind of like, I don't know, at the time when I started reading it and getting into it, it just felt like a new type of X-Men, kind of like a better
Yeah,
version of.
it's basically like Gen 13 was basically kind of like young kids with superpowers, and I remember it was supposed to be originally called Gen X, but then
Yeah,
Marvel got involved.
Generation X, yeah. So it's like it to me. That's how I felt at that time. Like I felt Gen 13 was just a way more cooler, edgier Generation X, and I know Marvel had Generation X at that time. With Jubilee leading, that kind of team. But we had Fairchild and
Grudge,
Grudge and
Burnout.
Burnout and Freefall. There was just like the characters just kind of seemed sexier and a lot more edgier at that time, and then that's when I really got turned on to J. Scott Campbell's art style, and that really made me take notice on a lot of those artists at that time. And I never really read it hardcore, but Wetworks, which was done by Willis Portacia, I believe that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah,
He was a phenomenal artist, and I remember reading Wizard magazine and just seeing like promotions for this upcoming title, and I believe he ended up getting sick, and the book never finished during that time, and I never really got a chance to dive into it. But Wildstorm, it was just interesting how I felt Wildstorm was like. I felt Image and Wildstorm was like the Wu-Tang Clan of like the comic book industry, where you had this ragtag of independent artists starting their own companies, starting their own titles, and then they started developing these subsets within the the Image brand. And Wildstorm was like the first, from my recollection, that came from that subset. And yeah, they really put out some interesting titles at that time.
yeah. It's
Uh,
like Image, like I mean, like Image, like they were all kind of like doing a shared universe type deal. Like, and there was all, and then, where they had McFarlane's deal with Spawn. They had Mark Silvestri doing like with doing stuff like Witchblade, or sorry, like he did, it's like what Cyberforce, and then
Cyberforce, and I
yeah,
think
Michael Turner on Witchblade. But
and
Wildstorm was always like kind of like first among equals here, because like they had Wildcats, they had Gen 13, they had Deathblow, they had Stormwatch.
yes, yeah, and if I recall, like I believe like uh Stormwatch and Wildcats, like that's like the name Wildstorm kind of came from those two titles. and that's how they derived that name. But yeah, that's how I became a really big fan too of Mark Silvestri. Like he did Cyberforce, and that kind of drew my attention to his artwork. But it was the darkness that under Top Cow that really caught my attention, and so like it really put new artists from that era and from that studio on notice. And yeah, I think as far as like Wildstorm comics go, like Gen 13 was like the only one I kind of kept up consistently on purchasing. Wildcats, as much as I love Jim Lee's artwork, my only familiarity with the characters in the story is from a cartoon series they used to have back in the early 90s. But from there, like I believe Battle Chasers came from Wildstorm, and
that was actually like a sub imprint within Wildstorm, Cliffhanger.
So that there goes my point again with them being like the Wu-Tang Clan of the comic book industry, with these subsets being created within these studios. And I remember
lots of different creators doing their own thing, doing their own solo albums. But I guess like the other thing is like the Wu-Tang also like got shit done.
Exactly.
They put out albums like as a group and as individuals, while like one of the big problems with like Image and also with Wildstorm in particular, it's like they also had like lots of creators who were just could not put out a book a month, really.
Which correct me if I'm wrong, but a case in point would be like Battle Chasers, for instance. Like that never really technically finished to this day, correct?
Well, it's no, and it's still not, because even though like Madureira has basically said during his Kickstarter for the Battle Chasers video game that, hey, it's like we're also gonna like try and put out the last 3 issues of the comic. It's like, and a lot of people were like kind of like, hey, this is great. But then he said it like about a year or so ago that, oh yeah, these 3 issues are still coming, but I'm probably not going to be able to do them myself. Because hey, it also turns out that, hey, apparently like his company, like what, Airship Games, or I can't remember what it's called, they're apparently doing something for the League of Legends, like Riot Forge, imprint. So that's kind of like telling as far as like how it's like how things have gone, because I mean like Wildstorm and Image Work were fucking white hot when they announced, and for like several years after that, to the point you could not get any more heat on an imprint or on the creators that were associated with it, right Myron?
Yeah. So I mean it's a very interesting story about how how this brand came about. So I mean, like I said, during that time, you really had DC and Marvel kind of like as the big heavy hitters in the comic book industry, and then you had these hotshot artists who work for these respective companies go off and start their own thing. And from this it kind of gave this resurgence of creator owned comic books and material and platform for these artists to come out and create their own books and create their own stories. And I think case in point, Spawn recently hit a milestone as being like the longest running independent comic book series ever. And
yeah, still running 300 issues plus now. Good for McFarlane.
Good for McFarlane. But I mean, a lot of these creators have come about and created characters that are still used and still timeless today in comic books in general. Like in Wildcats, there's a character Grifter, who I believe is still out and about within the DC universe.
Man, it's like I would love to be able to answer that, because DC did make a dedicated effort to incorporate some characters from the Wildstorm universe in their New 52 reboot. Because here's one of the big things about Wildstorm is that like as because like, they were so fucking hot that DC basically looked at them and said, "You know what? We should probably buy them," and they did. Because because like DC, as I remember correctly, like they had 3 things that DC really wanted. One of them was Jim Lee. Another one was like apparently their coloring studios, and the other was Alan Moore.
Mm.
Yeah, because Alan Moore, it's like, I mean, the fact that he like fell out with DC in the wake of Watchmen is like common knowledge at this point. Where he fell in after that was with the new creators at Image, especially at Wildstorm in particular, because he started writing Wildcats after a certain point. I've got like the volume that collects all of his Wildcat stories, and you know what? No, it's not as good as some of his best superhero related stuff, but it's like for the time, it is. I can imagine it being quite good, and we'll get to that back to that in a second. But Moore like did enough good stuff with working with Jim Lee that Lee gave him his own imprint, America's Best Comics, and that's how we got League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Promethea, Tom Strong. It was basically like Alan Moore's like latest comeback within the series, within the industry, and when DC looked at Wildstorm and thought, hey, you know what, we can get Alan Moore working for us again. Fuck yeah, let's buy this. It's like that, and that basically eventually led to the death of the imprint. But it's like for Jim Lee, it seems to have worked out pretty well for him because not only does whatever he does at DC gets like automatic like hey shit, Jim Lee's drawn like another series now. It's like he's still a name within within DC industry, but he's also like one of the big higher ups. Like I remember VP, he's like a VP or publisher at this point. But yeah, but that's kind of how it is, and that's kind of how that's where it's really like sterling independent success gets you in comics. Like if you're really great, then Marvel or DC would just like try to buy your ass out.
Yeah, and the thing is too that what was great about this independent movement in the 90s is that it allowed these artists and these storytellers to kind of like branch out of the mold and kind of like reach for the sky, because they weren't confined by the restraints of pre-existing characters that they had to stay within the lines to kind of like stay within their audience. Spider-Man, X-Men, they have a pre-established storyline by the original, by Stan Lee and the original creators, and they have to stay within that realm to not only tell new and compelling stories, but stay within the lines of keeping true to the character. By them branching off and doing their own things, they could just let their imaginations run wild and flow. And from that, we got a lot of great characters. We got a lot of great books at that time. A lot of great books that I felt that didn't really either get their true shine, or I feel didn't get the longevity that they deserved. Case in point, like I was really into Danger Girl at that time, which I believe was under the Cliffhanger umbrella as well.
Yep.
I remember collecting like maybe the first 10 issues, and that of course was because my dog J. Scott Campbell was drawing that book at that time. And I remember, I think it was during that time too where what you just mentioned, like DC ended up acquiring Wildstorm and it moved over to that umbrella, and it just didn't have that same and of course J. Scott Campbell wasn't drawing for it at that time. Like it just didn't have that same capture for me. So yeah, I felt like during that era of the early 90s, mid 90s, like we got a lot of phenomenal artists come from that Wildstorm Cliffhanger movement, especially one of my favorite, for all you guys know that I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and Humberto Ramos is one of my favorite Spider-Man artists ever. And I remember first being introduced to him through Crimson. And at that time, I think I really wasn't into his artwork because he had this kind of like exaggerated Bigfoot, big hand kind of like anime style. And I think Crimson was more of like a vampire book, so I didn't really show interest in it, but I do remember his work being kind of striking at that time. I'm like, oh, that's different. I see him now and how he's grown as an artist. Like I truly appreciate his artwork. And it's interesting to see how a lot of these books I used to collect in the 90s, like from J. Scott or Humberto or even Joe Madureira, how they drew in the 90s to how their style has grown and matured up until now. And I have to give thanks to the opportunities that they were presented with during that era, and it's all because of Jim Lee.
Yeah, it's like you make a great point right there. It's like that basically like one of the best things that Jim Lee did with Wildstorm is just basically like letting the creators do what they want. Basically just letting them go. It's like, hey, it's like just whatever you think is going to be a good idea, just go for it. And that's kind of what led to a lot of the success. And also it's like also to some of its weirder, it's like more writer driven impulses as well, because it's like for me though, it's like when you say Wildstorm, it's like I think of one guy, and that's Warren Ellis, because it's like he came on when he came on writing Stormwatch. I think like it was around issue 37, and it's like it was just another like X-Men clone series. I mean, you had like Henry Bendix, the Weatherman, like bald guy, it's like running a bunch of superheroes. Myron, it's like you don't have any strong memories of Stormwatch, or do you?
No, I remember the name, I remember the book, but I've never like paid close attention to it.
Okay, yeah, because basically when Ellis took over, he basically started he basically had like one of the villains quoting Nietzsche, like a naked flaming skull guy, and just like go and he just basically turned the team into like a more weird science fiction driven series, and one that would also would address like more current concerns like police brutality, believe it or not. And yes, it may seem just like kind of crude and all, like say, hey, superhero series in the early 90s is going to address police brutality, but it's kind of like, wow, it's like the series was kind of weird and strange. And when Ellis came on board, he introduced like a couple new characters such as Jenny Sparks, Spirit of Electricity in the 21st Century, Jack Hawksmoor, the character like a superhero who was in tune with cities and could only live within them, and Rose Tattoo, the living spirit of murder, and split Stormwatch into three groups. There was Prime, the it's like the group that could that was like meant for like large scale deterrent action. There was the police. There was the second level series, the one that was like only for like police level deterrent stuff, and then there was Black, the the team that was meant for covert ops stuff. And it's like, and Ellis did did a good job showing us like, hey, what could this, it's like, what could these characters be like when we're not just like doing like regular superhero stuff. I mean, he gave them distinct personalities. It's like introduced interesting mature level stuff, and also had some fun like playing with the conventions of superhero, like of the superhero history. Like there was one issue of Stormwatch where he had artist Tom Rainey it was give us Jenny Sparks's history, but it was also the history of like comics themselves, and he did and had Tom Rainey doing a good job of like putting the characters through like various eras in terms of like pulp style, it's like, and strong Ethnic Fury stuff. It's like it was good experimental work. And then when the series ended with issue 50 and relaunched with a new #1, it's like giving the series like a more international style appeal, and putting Jackson King in, like at the head of the team instead of Henry Bendix. Well, it's like Ellis just realized, hey, it's like this series is not. I mean, like I want to do like more with this. Like I don't want to have these characters like beholding to performing the status quo. And that's how we eventually got to the Authority, the team that basically like this is the team that basically realized, hey, it's like if some evil dictator is ruling, is inflicting terror upon the world, we're just gonna go in there and just yank his ass out of there and just just like destroy him and his power base. We can do this. Hey, if if there's some aliens from a parallel universe who are threatening us to take over the world, we can just go over there and just murder the fuck out of them. Hey, and if an evil Cthulhu-esque god is gonna come and destroy, it's like destroy us on the advent of the new millennium, then hey, we can just go and take them out as well. It's like the Authority was all about doing big superhero stuff on a big widescreen scale. It's like it was great. And even then, and after that, after Ellis and artist Brian Hitch departed after 12 issues of just like A-list superhero stuff, Mark Millar and Frank Quitely came over and took over and raised the bar even further for the next 8 issues. But and then there was more after that. But like things kind of went off the rails after like DC acquired Wildstorm, and they realized, oh my God, what is he doing? This is horrible. Yeah, and that's honestly kind of the story of what happened after that, because the Authority and was kind of like the biggest, like the highest point, and also kind of like the last gasp as far as Wildstorm's like influence went like under DC, because DC basically just did not like their kind of like extreme, it's like extreme irreverent approach to superheroes. I mean, sure, they kept letting like Lee and his creators like do what they wanted, but sales were declining. And even then, when Lee wanted to get back into things, like there was a big Wildstorm relaunch. There was supposed to be a big Wildstorm relaunch where he was drawing Wildcats again, and Grant Morrison was writing it, and Morrison was also going to take over the Authority with Gene Ha illustrating it. Then DC basically went, no, we want you to go and do other stuff.
Now, do you think what you mentioned before about like, DC didn't really care for like the extreme take on heroes? Do you think that was more because of the times? Because if you really think about it, like the early 90s, mid 90s, that was really
we're into the aughts now.
Oh, we're in the aughts now. Okay. Because like if you look but I'm saying if you look in like the early 90s and the mid 90s, like the anti-hero kind of like grimy type of hero was like really in at that point. Like your Spawns, Wolverine was super hot Wolverine's always been popular, but he was super hot at that time. That kind of like
that people were always trying to copy him.
Yeah, it's that during the 90s it was like the edgy hero, whereas back in the the golden age, silver age of comic books, it was that squeaky clean Superman, Clark Kent type hero. The 90s we kind of had that grimy kind of like dark anti-type hero. Then when we get to the aughts, like the hero, the view of the superhero or superheroes are changing yet again. Do you think DC acquiring Wildstorm and kind of not really digging that style of hero at that time kind of had that change in their perception of like, yeah, we don't want to go this route anymore?
Yeah, I think that DC's always been kind of squeaky clean, and I think, and I know what you're saying, but remember what I said about why DC bought Wildstorm? They bought it for three things. They did not buy Wildstorm for Grifter, for Spartan, for for Henry Bendix and all the other characters. They bought it for the people and technology associated with it.
Right.
So because one of the other things I think is telling is that when Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson brought the boys to Wildstorm, and they were doing that, DC basically looked at these first issue. Once it started coming out, DC realized, oh my God, we are publishing a series that is basically like giving a big middle finger to some of the characters that we publish. No, we are not doing this. You're canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically like that series wound up going over to Dynamite.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically like when you had this, because it was creator owned, because Ennis and Robertson owned this, they could do that. But at the same time though, it's like DC basically had Wildstorm. This is a series that was very much within Wildstorm's established wheelhorse, but DC just basically said, no, we're not doing this. And basically like, everything kind of after that, DC basically just kept Wildstorm, like every attempt they made to try and relaunch the brand just did not work. It just kept going. We're just getting further and further into diminishing returns until DC basically looked at things and went, okay, yeah, we're pulling the plug. And I'm sure like Lee looked at this and go, this is disappointing, but it's like I could see where this is going and all.
Yeah. I just think it's just like, it seems like it's kind of coming full circle again, at least in this day and age where, the edginess and kind of realness of certain characters and certain heroes is more prevalent now than it was in the 90s. And what I mean by that is like, like if I were to say an example of like, I'm going to refer to Spider-Man again because he's always been my favorite character. When Ultimate Spider-Man came out, where they kind of put Peter in a younger age again, but they kind of made him more edgier for that time, for like the early 2000s. I felt like that kind of resurrected a new fandom of current and new Spider-Man fans, because it just kind of made him a little bit more, less squeaky clean. I look at some of these properties that Wildstorm produced back in the 90s that might not have done well in that current reboot that you're talking about, but if they were to have done it like, let's say now, like it might be a little bit more successful than it would have been back then. And I'm wondering if like, now that, since DC ended up buying Wildstorm Productions, if that is like, they own those properties, they own those characters, that they would do, a new resurrection of some of these books, some of these franchises.
Well, that's kind of what you actually done a good job of Brett bringing us to what we're talking about right now, because I think that, like, I'm sure that Lee has always been like kind of pushing for some kind of Wildstorm revival, but at the same time, like, you kind of think, okay, what part of Wildstorm are we going to revive? Okay, obviously Lee is not going to like draw this because he is busy with, his commitments to his corporate commitments to DC, and also just whatever else that he wants to draw. It's like on his own time. So it's like I think like when the time came to think about, hey, that he wanted to go, hey, I want to go and revive Wildstorm. What is going to be the most commercially viable way to do this? And so I'm guessing he thought about this and he realized, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this to the one writer that is most closely associated with the brand. Going to give it to Warren Ellis. So that's how we get this 24-issue maxi series, The Wildstorm. It's basically Wildstorm is basically Warren Ellis taking everything about the Wildstorm universe. It's like we're talking, and he draws from a fairly broad range of properties associated with it, because Wildcats is in here, Stormwatch is in here, Gen 13 is addressed but not quite, but the thing is though, it's like because as this is something that Ellis is writing himself, the ultimate goal is always going to be leading back towards the Authority. But the series basically, because the way the series starts is basically you've got two opposing organizations. You got International Operations, which is basically like they're basically like running Earth from the shadows, running all the governments and everything. And then you've got Skywatch. Well, International Operations was, I think they were also a Gen 13 group, if I remember, right?
That doesn't sound familiar to me.
Okay. It's like International Operations was one of the evil bad groups. Skywatch is the group that is running like everything from space, and that's basically Stormwatch. So basically, you've got two secret organizations running the world, like opposed to each other. It's like trying, and they hate each other, but they've got treaties in place to keep them from killing each other and everyone else on Earth. The series starts with one of IO's engineers, special people, Angela Spica, talking to her boss, Miles Craven, and his husband, in the middle of in the middle of work on Earth, just like asking him just for additional resources to try and like help this thing that she's trying to do, because hey, she's also like bleeding out from her stomach in front of him. But he says he turns her down, and she's like going, going back to her lab trying to figure out what to do, and then some guy gets thrown out of a window. It's like out of the skyscraper, and so she realizes, okay, I've got to step up because no one else is doing anything. Because Angela Spica is the engineer from the Authority in the original version of the Wildstorm, and she is the same character here. She has got an like an exosuit that is underneath her skin, and she ignites it, saves the guy who turns out to be Jacob Marlowe, the head of the Halo Corporation, or the people will recognize as the head of the leader of the Wildcats. So she saves him and then runs off to parts unknown. Jacob realizes that she needs to be brought in under his group, which is a Wildcat, a Wild Covert Action Team, because covert action teams are what IO runs on their own terms. His is a Wildcat because it's not one of theirs, but it's also uses some of their people, which is one of them is of course Cole Cash, and then also there's Kenesha and Adriana Tereshkova, Void. So there's a lot of stuff brought that he's bringing in for the Wildstorm here. It's like, and I think that one of the things he gets this right here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Myron, is that one of the key ideas about the series is just like there's all these secret organizations running the world. There's the world we know is not being run by the people we've elected. It's just run by these secret organizations that are really in control, being IO and Skywatch.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it goes for the first couple of volumes, and because it's basically all about IO and Skywatch just find their conflicts slowly coming to a boil with Marlowe's Wildcat kind of stoking things in the background, but also you got Angela slowly coming into her own, realizing how I can work get my own technology under control, and also connecting with other people who are not affiliated with any organization, such as Jenny Mae Sparks, who also has the ability to run through any kind of technology. Shen Li Min, otherwise known as the Doctor, who is basically who is basically keyed into addressing the mental health of the world that she's in. And there's Jack Hawksmoor, again a character, a guy who is not necessarily designed to live whose ability to live in urban environments is only engineered because he was part of a slave race devised by Skywatch to live in and do the work in worlds that they've eventually conquered, because hey, we've nuked this place to oblivion. Now we need people to go in and and make things work. So, and if you're wondering hey, where do Apollo and the Midnighter come in? Well, they get a cameo appearance in Volume 3, and then they come into their own. It's in Volume 4. So, but Volume 3 will probably be of most interest to you, Myron, because it's not quite bringing in Gen 13, but it's basically has John Lynch going around visiting people from Project Thunderbook. Basically, all the parents of the characters from Gen 13 are met here.
Now, if I remember correctly, Lynch was their mentor, the crew's quote unquote Professor X, so to speak. Yeah,
it's basically he was the former head of IO in this series, and apparently Thunderbook was all about implanting alien DNA or Terran DNA into people to see what would happen. Some of them felt compelled to have kids. Others were messed up to serial killer levels of bad.
Wow, that's crazy. So weren't the parents from the characters from Gen 13, weren't their parents part of a series or a book called Team 7 or something like that?
It's like I know that Team Seven was a thing in Wildstorm. I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you that because I did not read. It's like any of it. I mean, like, Team Seven is familiar. It's like I think that might have been like wasn't that like Lynch's team before?
Yeah, I believe so. That like Lynch was part of that team. I remember because I remember references to that, and I thought that um, some, if not all, of the characters from Gen 13, like Fairchild, Freefall, and all them, like their parents were part of his crew, and that's why he's like mentoring them based off of what you're mentioning now too. That I felt that he was compelled to watch over their his team's children. So that's interesting that you make that correlation.
Yeah, it's like well, I think it's cool that Ellis was like trying to like incorporate a lot of it's like a lot of the Wildstorm lore into the series. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
it's like he wasn't just trying to do. I mean, like okay, the ultimate goal of his series, as we see in Volume 4, is basically bringing in the Authority, and it's like hey, it's like the, I mean he's entitled to do that because it's like that it's one of his big successes, and like, as far as like and like, it really makes sense in the course of the series because you've got these two organizations that are just like flaring up for a hot war against each other, and then you need like one other group that is basically going to come in and say, "Hey, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. We're just gonna we know how the world should be run, how the world needs to be run if we're not going to kill everyone on it." And it's like, and I think on that level, I think it's like it works. I mean, like just the idea of like hey, like these like the old systems of the world, like just turning out to be like conspiracy minded, broken, and not doing anyone any good, let alone the people who are running them. And then you've got like this other group coming in to try and break things up and show everything and everyone a new way. And I think and on that level, I think that series works. I mean, like it's like in terms of just like just taking like all these characters and all this lore that was not meant to be like one cohesive story and just turning it into one. I think that Ellis does succeed on that level. I think that definitely things could have been um like there are some things that he could have illustrated better, such as showing us just more about this like this specific like hold that IO has on our nation's governments. It's like stuff like stuff like that. And also, I think that the series is also like it's really dialogue driven. So it's kind of like I mean like Byron, you talk about all like the great art and action of the series that the original series had.
Uh-huh.
This one it's really just like lots of people talking about stuff in the hushed corridors of power. So I mean, the guy who does this all 24 issues is a guy named John Davis Hunt, and
Uh-huh.
it's like and I think he does a good job. He's great with the like the characters, like like showing us like characters and like showing us their emotions, and giving us a great Henry Bendix guy who just like whose design really leans into like evil Patrick Stewart. It's like it's great, and also just like other like it's like like Bendix's scientist bad guy Ragnar Hellspont, which hey, it's like you might remember as Hellspont being one of the evil Daemonite creatures from like from Wildcats. But hey, it's like here he's Ragnar Hellspont, which I think is a great name, and he's just being the evil mad scientist, and just throwing in just the ability to bring in that bit of character here was fantastic. And also, yes, the Daemonites are here, the Karens are here. It's like like I said, there's all sorts of stuff that he brings in here. It's like it's not just like the stuff that he wrote. And to be interested, I'm honestly kind of surprised that he didn't find time to bring in anything from Planetary. But it's probably for the best because Planetary was a great, largely self-contained series that took place in the Wildstorm universe, but didn't like directly address address a lot. It's like a lot of it. But one other thing about the series though is that even at 24 issues, it's like it really does feel like Ellis was setting things up for 24 more. Like the bits with introducing the parents of the Gen 13 crew. It's like, or just like introducing the Authority as they are saving the world. But hey, what do we do from here? It's like I figure that there's got to be more here. Like, and there's also like what about the Karens as well? So it feels like even at 24 issues. I mean, I guess one of the problems is that Ellis he's a great writer, but he's also like the kind of guy who just loves going off on digressions and it's like and just talking about like stuff without just delivering on it in some cases.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask you and bring up was after your time, reading this 24 issue line, like, do you think this is just a mere one-shot revival, or do you feel like it would be success, like the way the story and everything's been written out and fleshed out, that it would be successful enough to capture this current generation of readers to continue on with not only the Wildstorm series, but just bring some of these franchises back into their own, like a new Wildcats, a new Gen 13, things like that? Do you think this would totally revive like the stories under the Wildstorm brand?
Well, that was kind of the plan when things came out, because apparently when DC approached Jim Ellis about reviving Wildstorm, they wanted him they approached him like the idea of like, okay, doing a full-on revival series, which was the Wildstorm, and then also 2 additional series as well. One of them was Michael Cray, Deathblow, and he got a 12-issue series. Basically, just involved him going around killing DC characters who were in the Wildstorm universe. So, and he shows up. He's featured fairly prominently in the first couple of volumes before he just fades into the background and shows up again to get unceremoniously dealt with in the final volume. But while that series actually happened, another series that was supposed to be spin up after the Wildstorm was Ellis doing a 6-issue Wildcats series based on his take on the team here, and that was supposed to be with artist Ramon Villalobos. But for whatever reason, that series was effectively canceled, and Ellis basically says no, it's not going to see the light of day for whatever reason. It was supposed to be just like a 6-issue run, like. And it was gonna be like in his like global frequency mode of just doing like dense single issue stories of like the team engaging in like some crazy world threatening event within each issue, but it didn't happen. And one of the other reasons I think this didn't happen is because the series, when it launched, it sold all right, but not in the levels that would suggest that there was like a lot of nostalgia out there for a Wildstorm revival. So I'm glad that the series was able to run for all 24 planned issues. I think that based on what he was doing here, it could probably run for another 24 after that. But as it is, it's a good self-contained story that on one hand it reminds me of like, hey, this is what it's Ellis coming back to do his Wildstorm stuff, the stuff that made him famous. But it's not just him doing it like in a very different way than what he did back in the day. And I'm sure that's probably why he did it in the first place. But it's kind of like, anyone who came, I'm not sure how this would really appeal to anyone who was a huge fan of the series of Wildstorm in the first place, because like I said, it's a very dense, talky series. And while I think the art from Davis Hunt is quite good, it's leagues away from what Jim Lee and J. Scott Campbell were doing like at the time.
Right. I mean, at this point, like, you have like the older school fans who grew up with the original books that launch under the Wildstorm brand that are gonna kind of like stick with it and stick with that era. I think that rebranding and redoing the Wildstorm in this day and age for people who don't know about those characters and that history, you just have like you basically have 20 years of like new readers available to be able to reappeal to, and maybe be able to spark a new interest to be able to relaunch those kind of lines. So yeah, it would be interesting to see if that ever were to come about.
Yeah, it's like I mean, like he like Ellis kind of really had to do something different because I mean, you just couldn't just put a new like Wildstorm series out this day and age and expect every like I mean like all of us who remember like the glory days of Wildstorm, we're kind of a dying breed. And while the series was undoubtedly trading on some of that nostalgia, it also made I think it made a good effort to try and like reconfigure that, just give us something that we weren't expecting as far as just hey, remember how things used to be for the Wildstorm universe? Well, nope, we're
Here.
doing things differently.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's so I liked it. I mean, like I'm not necessarily sure if I would like just if I would say that hey, you got to go out and buy this now, Myron. But the first 12 issues like do have like they've all got variant covers from Lee, so he was clearly on board with this. So,
I assume this is on trade paperback as well.
yeah, so like
Okay.
yeah, all four volumes are available in trade paperback right now, and you can go out and you can go and buy them whenever you want. So
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, Jason knows me. Like I'm more old school, where I usually collect um, individual issues of certain books, and I'm old school. Board and bag. Boxes of comic books. But trade paperbacks are like a better way to ingest and get the full story, especially like if you're spending $4 or $5 on a comic book and you're unsure if you're going to be able to keep up with the expenses of individual issues, then you might not want to invest or even jump into a storyline that way. So when I talk to you or listen to your podcasts about certain trades that you've read, and based off your recommendation, they're usually at good prices to where like, okay, I'm willing to take a gamble and pick this up and see if I could dive into it well. And seeing as how this story, the Wildstorm, actually pertains to something I'm familiar with from my childhood, I'm a little bit more inclined to like, okay, if I can find this on Amazon, for good price, I'm willing to dive in and check it out.
yeah, it's like I said, it's a lot different from what you expect, but I think it's a good kind of different.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we're all getting older. We're all aging. Like I don't expect, and I think this is more of a fan thing where it's like if you're seeing a resurrection or a reboot of something you grew up and knew and love, you can't really expect the same thing. You can't have member berries with everything.
yeah,
Sometimes I like to see different perspectives. Actually, a lot of the times I do like to see different perspectives and different interpretations because, one way I used to view the one way I used to view it at a particular medium as a child, I might view differently as an adult. There's certain things I used to love as a kid I don't like as an adult. There's certain things I used to hate as a kid that I love as an adult. Like, I mean, it's all about a matter of perspective and the way the medium is presented at you. And like I said, talking earlier, like, when it comes to comic books, the first thing that is drawn to me is the artwork. Being, somewhat of an artist myself, like I've always looked at artwork as that drawing factor. But if the story is crap, then it's like, oh well, I hated the story, but at least I have some cool artwork to look at or reference to. But when you have something, when you come up with a property or a book where it marriages a good story and good artwork, then everybody, like, the consumer wins. And that's what drew me into a lot of those books from back in the day, your Gen 13s and your Danger Girls and all that. Like, and I'm being biased because I'm spitting both J. Scott Campbell books, but that was one thing that drew me into those stories, were his artwork. And a lot of books like that Jim Lee did, that drew me into those books from what he drew. And so, like, but as an adult, like, I tend to kind of I still look at the artwork, but I also look at the synopsis and what the story's about. And of course, talking to other fans and talking to friends like you, I get different perspective to where, like, how much is my time worth, and what am I going to use to spend my time with? What am I going to spend my money on, and what am I going to spend my time with? And when I get recommendations from you, it's like, okay, like let me take a look at this and see what it's about. So yeah, it sounds like this is a interesting modernization, harkening back to something that I'm familiar with that I kind of want to check out.
Yeah, I think you should at least give the first volume a read just to see if it's up your alley.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and John, it's like, so any thoughts on your end about like any of this?
Yeah. No.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, but
Yep.
I'm glad you could join us because I'm realizing, like I said, your perspective on like when I say Wildstorm, it's like I got my perspective on what they brought to the table, and that's like a lot different than your perspective and what you think they brought to the table as well.
Yeah,
Indeed.
because I think you spit more insight about this beyond what I've mentioned earlier. But a lot of people don't remember that there was a Wildcats cartoon and toy line and a Gen 13 animated. I think it was a short animated movie. Nobody remembers that, and when I bring up Gen 13 or those type of franchises, nobody really remembers Wildstorm. I think that Marvel and DC have dominated for so long, like everyone forgets about Image, and everybody forgets about.
Well, everyone's forgotten about old school Image. Image these days is a lot different. Than,
Yeah, I should have chose my words differently because I forget The Walking Dead is the biggest thing from Image. But yeah, old school Image that came about like I mentioned about what they did for independent comic book artists and writers. I don't.
Yep.
It was amazing, and I think that the independent comic book scene we have today might not be what it is if it weren't for those 6 individuals that went off and did their own thing. And within that independent studio they created, they ended up creating more studios like Top Cow, Wildstorm, and so many different things. And it was a magical time in comic books at that point. And I truly do miss it because I mean, a lot of the folks that you mentioned earlier, like Jim Lee's doing a lot of important big wig things within DC, but
trying to keep the company from closing down under Warner Brothers.
Exactly. But when he picks up a pencil and does things, like it's going to be quality.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Do you know what you're going to talk about next time?
Oh, so thanks to the magic of time travel, I can tell you that we're going to be talking about Paper Girls next time we do this. But the next time after that, well, hey Myron, you're coming back to talk to me and John about House of X and Powers of X, right?
Krakoa for life.
Yep.
Yeah.
No spoilers. No, just
spoilers.
kidding. No, there's no spoilers there. Move along.
All right.
Anyway.
Looking forward to that.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely. And we'll catch you next time on Comic Picks by the Glade.
Laters.
Later. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.